Heather from booktubes, and today is Consensual Non Consent. This is probably my favorite kink to read about. I know why I like it, and honestly that has to do with purity culture. But there are a lot of different reasons why people like consensual non-consent. Consensual non-consent is where there is consent. There is a clear indication from both parties that they know what they're doing. There is usually a safe word or some specific thing that they are using to ask for permission without asking for permission. Both parties understand it and it is clear to them that it is consensual, but then usually the female can yell no and run and fight and do all these things, and it will still act out because none of those things are her safe word or the thing that will make it all stop, right? So some people can read consensual non-consent, and if it's not explained prior to any scenes, they can read it as dubious consent. But dubious consent and consensual non-consent are not the same thing. So just be aware of that. So I have a variety of different ones here. Again, this is probably my favorite kink to read. I finally have enough to do a recommendation video. And some of these guys are good guys. Some of them maybe not so much. Some of them, you know, depends on your perspective. But I will try to be clear on triggers and the kind of the way that it plays out in these books, so I'm excited. First one is Sing Me to Sleep by R.M. Virtues. I just read this one and loved it. We have a sleep paralysis demon. So he is able to go into dreams sometimes, not very often, but he can go into people's dreams, and of the people who have their dreams, he can only touch them if they consent. So even though she is acting like she doesn't want it, he actually can't do it unless she does want it. And she has trauma from her father being murdered in a home invasion with her in the house. And she's had night terrors and paralysis and just is having a horrific time. All the stuff that you might have a trigger for with your own sleep issues would be at the beginning of the book. So kind of if you can make it through those scenes, you'll be good for the rest of the book, if that makes sense. But yeah, it's so good. There is an HEA for the couple. There is a plot that is going to be continued throughout the series, which I really wasn't anticipating. I thought I was just getting a smutty novella, but he pulled it off really well. Very invested in the plot, really liked the couple, and loved this one. If you like paranormal, this might be a good place to start. Then I have Desperate Measures, which is Wicked Villains #1 by Katee Robert. This is consensual non-consent, but there's like one sentence where it's like she knows to say this thing if she doesn't want it. And if you miss that, then you might not understand that it's consensual non-consent. I found it to be very clear, and I know of several people who did not find it to be very clear. So it is consensual non-consent. It's not dubious at all, but again, it's like one sentence. You have to pay attention to it. This is a Jasmine and Jafar retelling. It's kind of a mafia style setting. So her father is the head of the crime organization, and he's going to sell her in marriage to Aladdin, and she doesn't want him to, and Jafar was always planning on taking over the organization, but because she's going to be sold, he steps up his plan and takes her, and there is consensual non-consent right off the bat, very first scene. It's so good. It's so good. They also play in the BDSM club where you see other kind of villain characters from fairy tales. I highly recommend, if you have never read Katee Robert, this is a good place to start. Then I have Captivated by Tessa Bailey and Eve Dangerfield, I think. This one, the guy is so sweet. So if you want someone who is really sweet about it, it's kind of like a Beauty and the Beast type retelling, but she is a little tiny blonde Australian who got cheated on by her boyfriend, so she dumped him, and then she has been having fantasies about their landlord, who is large and hairy and grumpy and has a limp. And through a series of events, he finds out that she has these fantasies about him, and he's like, okay, I will do this for you, and plus he's very into it. But I want to go on dates, so I don't want you to be genuinely terrified of me. Even though you think that's part of your fantasy, I don't want that. I want you to know that you're safe with me, and we can't do that if we don't know each other. So they go on dates and they do consensual non-consent. She's a veterinarian and she's trying to decide if she should apply to get her work visa renewed or if she should go back to Australia with her family that she doesn't really want to have to go back to. It's so good. He does mess up pretty epically with their breakup. Though, like, I wouldn't have broken up over it. I would have been mad, but I wouldn't have broken up over it. But they work it out. They do. So, break up, a little, you know, a little whatever, but the rest of it, fantastic. Then I have Dirty Filthy Rich Men by Laurelin, Paige. This was my first ever consensual non-consent. This book is when I found out that it was a thing and I loved it. So she is at a college party and almost gets assaulted and he saves her, and this kind of starts her kink with consensual non-consent. And they basically have a one-time thing and then she leaves college for a different reason and it's 10 years later and they run into each other again. That's all I'm gonna say. It's a little bit of a dark romance, but it's my favorite of her books that I've read. Also, it is a duet, so you don't really get the HEA in this book. Next, I have Truly by Carmel, Rhodes. This one has a major content warning because it is the hero sexually assaulting the heroine at the beginning of the book, and after that, they have a consensual non-consent relationship. So he assaults her one time, and after that, they have a consensual relationship. There are other factors. Do the other factors make it easier to forgive him? I think yes. Do they make what he did okay? Obviously not. So it's just up to you. I obviously knew that going into the book. I knew to expect that. I don't see how you would enjoy the book if you didn't know to expect that. So, you know, if you don't want to read that, don't read it, because that is what it is. It's on Page at the beginning of the book. That's what happened.
Okay, so editing. I just want to jump in and say that the heroine is black and the hero is rich and white, and that's not really addressed in the book at all. I don't think it's ever addressed, the racial inequality on top of the assault and power plays, but like if you want to read it for that reason either, I always kind of think about mentioning that and I never do, and this time I am, so be aware.
So he assaults her the night of their high school graduation, then they end up going on a summer road trip in basically memory of her mother before college starts, and he does have to grovel, not so much for the assault, but he does have to grovel for other mistakes at the end there. I did love it. I actually reread this book, still loved it. So, you know, if they can make you root for the hero, that takes some skill. Lastly, I had Bait by Jade West. This one I wouldn't recommend as strongly because this, while it is consensual, it very much plays out as non-consensual, and like a lot of physical harm comes to her, and I wasn't really into that. So even though mentally she's consenting, physically she's still undergoing a lot of trauma. Basically, she is looking for somebody to do consensual non-consent with her on the internet, and this guy is like, you're gonna attract a bunch of weirdos. I don't think this is a good idea. But they end up having a thing. That's really all I've got to say about it. Again, it's very rough, very rough. So if that's not what you want, definitely would not start with this book. If this isn't a kink that you already like, would not start with this book, and it's the roughest. Obviously, you would think, truly, you would think that the one before this, where the hero does an actual assault on the heroine, would be the worst, but this one plays out much rougher, even though it's all consensual. So again, there you go. Do you have any book recommendations for me with consensual non-consent? Like I said, I do love reading it. If you've read any of these, let me know. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.